There is no end to the tariff war with Canada. President Trump is now taking aim at dairy and lumber imports.
What if I told you the United States just lost its most critical energy lifeline overnight? Canada, its top supplier of oil and natural gas, has made a bold and unexpected move, one that will send shockwaves through the economy. Fuel prices are about to spike, industries are bracing for impact, and Washington is scrambling for a backup plan that does not exist. For years, the United States assumed Canada would always be a reliable energy partner. That assumption is now a costly mistake. With new global deals in place, Canada no longer needs the United States the way it once did, and it is wasting no time in shifting its exports elsewhere. Why did Canada make this move now? What does it mean for American energy security? And how could this decision impact your daily life? Let's break it down. How did all this happen? And why it's worse than you think? The warning signs were there, but few in the United States took them seriously. For decades, Canada was the reliable supplier, the steady hand in global energy markets, always delivering oil and gas to power American industries, homes, and vehicles. That stability is now gone. This is not just a temporary disruption or a political spat that will blow over. This is a strategic realignment, a deliberate shift in how Canada approaches its role in the global energy market. This move is not just economic, it is political, and it is long-term. Canada is not just stepping away from the United States, it is stepping into a new era of energy independence, one where its economy is no longer tethered to American policies and trade agreements. Washington may have thought that Canada had no choice but to keep supplying cheap energy to the United States, but that assumption is proving to be a critical mistake. The consequences will be massive. And for American consumers, businesses, and policymakers, the real pain is only beginning. The one mistake that made Canada ditch the United States for good. Washington thought it had the upper hand. For decades, the belief was simple. Canada needed the United States more than the United States needed Canada. It was an arrangement that seemed unshakable. The United States provided a massive, reliable market, and Canada delivered the oil and gas needed to power an economic powerhouse. But that dynamic is now in free fall. And it is all because of one critical miscalculation. The shift did not happen overnight. It was not a sudden decision made in a closed-door meeting. It was the result of years of growing frustration in Canada over trade policies, tariffs, and protectionist measures coming from Washington. The beginning of the end came when aggressive tariffs were imposed on Canadian goods. What started as a political maneuver quickly escalated into a trade war, one that Washington assumed Canada would endure without retaliation. That assumption turned out to be a serious mistake. At first, Canada tried to negotiate. Warnings were sent, statements were made, and diplomatic channels were used to caution Washington that if trade restrictions continued, Canada would be forced to explore other options. Those warnings fell on deaf ears. The belief in Washington was that Canada had no alternative, that geography and existing infrastructure made it impossible for Canadian energy to go anywhere else. That belief is now crumbling, and the consequences are beginning to take shape. Canada's government took a decisive step, accelerating efforts to diversify its energy exports. New deals were signed, new trade partnerships were formed, and massive investments were made to shift energy flows away from the United States. The moment the tariffs went into effect, Canada made its move, and now the United States is facing an energy crisis that could have been entirely avoidable. This was not a decision made out of anger or political retaliation. It was a calculated move, a long-term strategy designed to ensure that Canada is no longer vulnerable to American trade policies. The shift is already in motion, and the United States is only now beginning to realize what it has lost, where Canada's oil is going instead, and why it's a nightmare for the United States. The United States assumed that Canada would never walk away, but while Washington was focused on internal politics, Canada was busy securing new buyers for its energy resources. The result? A complete transformation in global energy markets, one that leaves the United States scrambling for alternatives. The new destinations for Canada's oil and gas tell a clear story. Instead of sending its resources south, Canada is pivoting toward Asia and Europe. China and India, two of the fastest-growing energy markets in the world, have wasted no time in securing long-term supply deals. These agreements lock in Canadian oil and gas for decades, giving these countries a stable energy source at a time when global demand is rising. Europe, still reeling from energy supply disruptions, has also turned to Canada. With Russian energy imports no longer a viable option, European nations are now betting everything on securing deals with Canada. Billions of dollars are flowing into new infrastructure projects that will ensure a steady supply of Canadian energy reaches European shores, bypassing the United States entirely. Pipelines that once carried crude oil and natural gas to American refineries are now being rerouted. Liquefied natural gas export terminals, once envisioned as a way to strengthen North American energy ties, are now serving an entirely different purpose: sending Canadian energy overseas. For the United States, this is a worst-case scenario. Losing a major energy supplier is not just a minor inconvenience. It is a seismic shift that threatens to upend entire industries. The infrastructure that once guaranteed a steady flow of energy is becoming obsolete, and the ripple effects will be felt across every sector of the economy. By the time Washington fully grasps the scale of this transformation, Canada will be too far gone to bring back. United States gas prices are about to explode. Here's how bad it could get. Think gas prices are high now? Just wait. Losing Canada as a primary energy supplier is not just a headline. It is a direct hit to the wallets of millions of Americans. The cost of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel is already creeping up, and that is just the beginning. The immediate effect will be felt at the pump. Canadian oil accounted for a massive share of American imports, helping to keep gas prices lower than they would have been otherwise. Now, with that supply vanishing, American refineries will have to turn elsewhere, and that means buying from less stable, more expensive markets. Air travel will be another casualty. The aviation industry relies heavily on affordable jet fuel to keep ticket prices reasonable. With the loss of Canadian energy, airlines will be forced to pay significantly higher prices for fuel, and those costs will inevitably be passed on to passengers. The trucking industry, the backbone of the American supply chain, will not be spared either. Diesel prices are expected to surge, raising transportation costs for goods ranging from groceries to electronics. When the cost of moving products across the country rises, consumers will feel it in higher prices for nearly everything they buy. This is just the start. The longer the United States remains without a stable energy supply, the worse the economic fallout will become. Inflation, already a growing concern, will be exacerbated by rising energy costs. The pressure on households and businesses will intensify, and for many there will be no easy way to absorb the added expenses. What seemed like a minor policy decision years ago has now spiraled into a full-scale crisis. The United States is facing an energy disaster of its own making. And the worst part, there is no quick fix in sight. Washington's panic mode. Can the United States stop the energy collapse? What happens when the world's biggest economy suddenly loses its energy supply? The White House is scrambling for solutions, but every option seems to come with severe consequences. Government officials are in crisis mode, holding emergency meetings with energy executives and foreign trade negotiators in an attempt to reverse the damage. The urgency is clear. Without a reliable supply of oil and gas, the entire economic system is at risk. But even as leaders attempt to find a way out, political divisions within the country are making real progress, nearly impossible. Behind closed doors, Congress is locked in a battle with energy lobbyists who are pushing for immediate policy shifts. Some lawmakers are demanding a rollback of tariffs on Canadian goods, arguing that this is the fastest way to restore energy imports. Others are insisting that the country must double down on domestic production, increasing drilling and refining capacity to compensate for the shortfall. Meanwhile, energy executives are warning that even if a decision is made today, the damage may already be too great to undo. As these negotiations drag on, the situation continues to deteriorate. American consumers are feeling the pressure as gas prices skyrocket and utility bills climb. Industries reliant on stable energy costs are watching their bottom lines shrink by the day. Every delay in action pushes the country closer to economic freefall. The question is no longer whether the government will act, but whether it will act in time to prevent disaster. Blackouts incoming. The power grid shock no one saw coming. This crisis is not just about oil. The entire electrical grid is now at serious risk, and millions of Americans could be left in the dark. For decades, Canada supplied the United States with hydroelectric power, stabilizing electricity costs in key states like New York, Michigan, and California. That support is now disappearing, and there is no clear backup plan in place. Winter is approaching, And with it comes the possibility of widespread energy shortages. Northeastern states, which have long relied on affordable hydroelectric power from Canada, are scrambling to secure alternative suppliers. Officials are warning that demand will outstrip supply, leading to sharp increases in electricity rates and potential rolling blackouts. In cities where energy costs are already high, consumers are bracing for bills that could double or even triple in the coming months. States are desperately looking for solutions, but none are immediate. Building new power plants takes years, and expanding existing infrastructure requires long-term investments that have not been made. Some local governments are even considering rationing electricity during peak hours to prevent grid failure. While this may buy time, it does not solve the underlying issue. The loss of Canadian energy is not a temporary setback. It is a fundamental shift that is forcing the United States to confront the vulnerability of its energy system. As the crisis deepens, the country is left to wonder, how did a nation that once prided itself on energy independence find itself on the brink of collapse? The answer lies not just in one decision, but in years of underestimating the importance of its northern neighbor. United States factories are in trouble. The energy crisis that could kill jobs. Steel, auto, and technology industries are bracing for disaster as energy prices continue to soar. Manufacturing plants that depend on stable energy costs are now facing some of the highest electricity and fuel rates in decades, making production more expensive and, in some cases, unsustainable. The consequences of this crisis are stretching far beyond power bills. They are threatening thousands of jobs and the very foundation of industrial America. Automakers are already feeling the squeeze. Companies like Ford and General Motors are warning that rising production costs could force them to slow down manufacturing or even shut down certain facilities. Factories that rely on cheap steel and aluminum are struggling to stay competitive as material costs spike. The United States steel industry, which was supposed to benefit from tariffs on Canadian imports, is instead facing a supply chain nightmare. Prices are rising faster than anticipated, and manufacturers are left with fewer options. The food industry is another casualty of the crisis. Meatpacking plants, dairy farms, and frozen food producers rely heavily on electricity and fuel for refrigeration, processing, and distribution. As energy costs skyrocket, many companies are being forced to pass the burden on to consumers. Grocery store prices are climbing, making basic necessities more expensive for families across the country. The worst part is that there is no clear end in sight. Unlike temporary economic downturns that can be reversed with policy changes or stimulus packages, this energy crisis is structural. It requires massive infrastructure investments, trade negotiations, and energy policy reforms that take years to implement. For workers in these industries, that means the threat of job loss is very real. For companies, it means making tough decisions about layoffs, price increases, and even potential relocations to countries with more stable energy supplies. As the United States faces the harsh reality of its reliance on foreign energy, the focus shifts northward. Canada, once seen as merely a convenient supplier, is now emerging as a dominant force in the global energy market. While Washington scrambles to fix the crisis, Canada is capitalizing on the moment. Canada's master plan, how it became an energy superpower overnight. Canada is not just moving away from the United States, it is solidifying its place as one of the most powerful energy exporters in the world. While the United States struggles to cope with the loss, Canada has been busy securing billion-dollar trade deals with Europe and Asia. These agreements are not just about diversifying trade, they are about reshaping global energy dynamics. Massive investments in liquefied natural gas, oil infrastructure, and renewable energy projects have positioned Canada as a leading supplier in multiple sectors. Countries that once depended on American energy are now looking to Canada for stable and affordable alternatives. European nations, desperate for new suppliers after cutting ties with Russia, are fast-tracking agreements with Canadian energy companies. Asian markets, particularly China and India, are locking in long-term contracts that will ensure a steady flow of Canadian resources for years to come. Unlike the United States, which is dealing with internal divisions over energy policy, Canada has embraced a clear and unified strategy. The government has poured resources into infrastructure development, ensuring that pipelines and export facilities can handle increased demand. Investments in renewable energy are further strengthening its position, giving Canada leverage not just in oil and gas, but in hydro and wind power as well. For decades, Canada was viewed as a secondary player in the global energy market, overshadowed by the dominance of the United States. That is no longer the case. Canada is now in control of its own destiny, and the rest of the world is taking notice. The United States, once the leader in North American energy, is now watching as its closest neighbor takes center stage. While Washington debates its next move, Canada is moving forward with confidence. The shift is not temporary, it is permanent. The question now is whether the United States can find a way to adapt, or if it will be left struggling in the wake of a new energy era. Can the United States find a way out? Here are its only three options. The United States is now at a crossroads, and none of the choices ahead come without risk. The loss of Canadian oil and gas has created a supply vacuum that cannot be ignored. Without immediate action, energy prices will continue to rise. Industries will struggle to remain competitive, and global influence will weaken. Washington has three options: repair relations with Canada, increase domestic production, or seek new suppliers. But here's the real problem. Every path comes with massive consequences. The first option seems obvious: rebuild the energy relationship with Canada. For decades, Canada provided the United States with a reliable and affordable energy supply. Restoring trade agreements could stabilize fuel prices and secure long-term economic security. However, this is easier said than done. The damage is not just economic, it is political. Canada's leaders have spent years diversifying their markets, sealing billion-dollar deals with Asia and Europe. Their energy exports are no longer dependent on one customer. Even if the United States lifts tariffs and offers new incentives, there is no guarantee that Canada will prioritize American buyers again. Energy flows where demand is highest and where trade conditions are most favorable. The United States may find itself in a position where it is no longer Canada's most valuable partner. If diplomacy fails, the next option is to ramp up domestic energy production. The United States has vast oil reserves, particularly in Texas, North Dakota, and the Gulf of Mexico. Expanding drilling operations and accelerating liquefied natural gas production could reduce reliance on foreign suppliers. But this comes with significant trade-offs. Infrastructure projects take years to develop. Environmental regulations are tightening, and oil companies remain cautious about long-term investments. Even if every restriction were lifted, the immediate impact on fuel prices would be minimal. Domestic oil production is already operating at high levels, and any significant expansion would require both financial and political backing that may not be available. That leaves the third and most dangerous option: finding new suppliers. Without Canada, the United States must turn to alternative sources such as Venezuela, the Middle East, or other oil-producing nations. But here's the problem. These suppliers come with high costs and instability. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries controls much of the global oil market, dictating prices through production quotas. Any reliance on these nations leaves the United States vulnerable to price manipulation and political leverage. Venezuela, despite holding some of the world's largest oil reserves, has been in economic and political turmoil for years. Negotiating new trade agreements would be an uphill battle, requiring significant concessions that Washington may not be willing to make. The Middle East, though rich in oil, presents its own risks. The United States would find itself dependent on nations that have, at times, been openly hostile to its interests. This shift could come at the expense of national security and economic stability. No matter which option the United States chooses, the consequences will be felt for years. A fractured relationship with Canada, an uncertain domestic energy future, and risky global dependencies are now at play. The question is not just about energy, it is about power. If Washington fails to act decisively, it risks losing more than just oil. It risks losing its position as a dominant force in global markets. And while the United States struggles to find a way out, another superpower is already several steps ahead: China's energy grab. How it's using this crisis to gain power. China is playing chess while the United States is still playing checkers. As Washington scrambles to respond to its energy crisis, China has been methodically securing its position as the world's next energy superpower. The shift away from Canadian oil has not just hurt the United States, It has created an opportunity for Beijing to take control of global energy markets. And China is not wasting a second. For years, China has been quietly stockpiling oil, natural gas, and coal, preparing for exactly this kind of supply disruption. Unlike the United States, which has relied on decades of energy stability, China has always operated with a long-term strategy. It has invested heavily in new trade routes, alternative fuel sources, and strategic reserves. The result? While the United States is losing access to Canadian energy, China is locking in billion-dollar deals that will secure its supply for decades. One of the most significant moves China has made is its direct partnership with Canada. While the United States assumed it would always be Canada's primary energy buyer, Beijing stepped in with better offers. Canadian companies, now free from dependence on the American market, have shifted exports to Chinese refineries. This gives China an enormous advantage: access to stable, high-quality fuel supplies without the political instability that often comes with energy dependence on the Middle East. The agreements China has signed are not just for the next few years. They are structured for long-term stability, ensuring that China's industries and infrastructure remain unaffected by global oil shocks. But China's energy dominance does not stop with Canada. It has also been aggressively securing deals with Russia, the Middle East, and Africa, diversifying its supply chain far beyond what the United States has achieved. This strategy makes China nearly immune to Western sanctions and market fluctuations. The more energy China controls, the greater its influence over global trade and manufacturing. Nations that rely on Chinese goods will, in turn, become dependent on Chinese energy security. This is not just about oil and gas. It is about reshaping global power dynamics. The biggest concern for Washington is that the United States is running out of ways to counter China's strategy. Sanctions will not work, as China has already built alternative trade routes. Economic pressure is ineffective, as China's energy reserves allow it to absorb short-term price shocks. The only real solution for the United States is to secure new energy sources before China takes full control of global supply. But given the pace at which Beijing is moving, the window of opportunity is closing fast. The domino effect that could reshape America. Energy is the foundation of a nation's economy. But what happens when that foundation starts to crack? The consequences of losing a vital energy supplier like Canada are not just immediate. They extend far beyond rising gas prices and power shortages. This shift has set off a chain reaction that could permanently alter the economic landscape of the United States. Industries are already feeling the pressure. Manufacturing plants that once thrived on cheap and reliable energy are now struggling to stay afloat. The automotive sector, long considered the backbone of American industry, faces an uncertain future. Factories that rely on steady electricity and affordable fuel are seeing operational costs skyrocket. In response, automakers are considering outsourcing more production to countries with lower energy costs. If this trend continues, thousands of workers in Michigan, Ohio, and other industrial hubs could lose their jobs. But the effects go far beyond the factory floor. The cost of transporting goods is climbing, forcing businesses to raise prices on everything from groceries to electronics. Trucking companies, which depend on affordable diesel, are facing an impossible choice: pass the costs on to consumers or cut routes altogether. Either way, the burden falls on the average American. Everyday essentials are becoming more expensive, and for families already struggling with inflation, these price hikes are devastating. The financial markets are reacting as well. Investors are growing uneasy as uncertainty looms over the energy sector. Without a stable oil and gas supply, businesses face higher production costs, leading to lower profit margins. The stock market, always sensitive to economic instability, is showing signs of volatility. If this energy crisis deepens, it could trigger another round of financial turbulence, affecting retirement funds, savings accounts, and investment portfolios across the country. And then there is the matter of energy independence. For decades, politicians have promised that the United States could stand on its own, free from reliance on foreign oil. But the reality is far more complicated. The nation's refineries are designed to process the type of crude oil that Canada supplied. Without it, the United States must now turn to the Middle East, South America, and other unstable regions for fuel. This shift not only raises costs, but also exposes the country to greater geopolitical risks. If one of these new suppliers experiences conflict, sanctions, or production cuts, energy shortages could become even worse. The long-term consequences are clear. The loss of Canadian energy is not just a temporary setback. It is a fundamental shift in global power. Canada is forging new alliances, strengthening its economy, and securing its place as a dominant player in the energy market. Meanwhile, the United States is left scrambling to find alternatives, facing higher costs and greater economic uncertainty. With every passing day, the gap between energy security and energy crisis grows wider. The question is, can the United States adapt before it is too late?